Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and I'm thrilled to be
My
back.
pleasure.
I'm thrilled to be back here at Ideas. I really enjoyed the Boston Summit. I thought there was a lot of really great people, a lot of really great questions, and let's keep that going, right? So, what I wanted to do today, since it's a little bit less formal, everyone's in sort of the comfort of their own homes. If you do have questions, type them out. Happy to sort of jump in, answer any questions, even as we go along through the presentation. And I want to make this as useful as I can for you, right? So, if you do have questions, I'm happy to answer those over, some of the original content that was even planned. And I know when I was chatting with Susie, we sort of explored and sort of, wanted to know what does the audience really want to understand? Like, what are you interested in, right? We see a lot of things across the Web3 space. So for some context, we've got about 110 portfolio companies now across the Web3 space. We end up with like a very broad lens, across the entire space. We see the most innovative things popping up, but we've also got a lot of depth in each of these areas. Just to, for everyone to be aware, we probably look at 500 companies a month when we're analyzing and determining which companies to invest in, and we might invest in 1, 2, 3, or 4 companies on a monthly basis, right? So we are seeing a lot of really, really cool things across the space. We've been very active as investors, even through this, most recent bear market. And so with that, we thought the best way to sort of go through areas of interest is to really touch on the areas where blockchain is actually having an impact. Where is it driving an ROI in different industries? And part of this helps us to understand even where is there opportunities for us to invest at an early stage, where is there already things starting to move, companies starting to recognize and implement and test out solutions. And that's also going to drive a lot of value into businesses, right, that are at an early stage that we're investing in. So that's sort of the idea behind this presentation. Definitely feel free, as I mentioned, to jump in with any questions. So we're going to go through a number of different areas, from blockchain, gaming, AI, even metaverse, creator economy, supply chain. But we're also going to talk about maybe some less known or like less popular topics that come up, like pets and ownership, right? Which, a lot of people own pets, but you don't typically hear about this as an industry that's getting impacted by innovation. So let's talk about it. Remittances is a really good one. We've done a lot of work, as Susie mentioned, with the United Nations. One of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to really bring down remittance costs to at most 3%, right? And this is a big problem globally. So we're going to talk about that as well. And we're going to touch on education. We're going to show you some examples even of what does, blockchain, really do in the education space. How is it solving problems in this space? And then charity and social impact, sort of to cap off, the talk here. So, before we sort of jump into some of those other areas, I just wanted to give you an idea of what, major global companies are doing, right? And I'm just going to use this as one example. Alibaba is one of the biggest e-commerce companies in the world. And, they've already filed over 2,500 blockchain patents, right? And so there's just a lot of areas where you're seeing big companies find interesting things that they're exploring. They're probably filing patents before, they're putting things fully into production, which is common. But I think it shows you that they're seeing a lot of areas where there could be value, and they're going out and patenting those. And then over time, these are things that are going to get built out, right? Some of them will get built out, some of them won't. We've seen already Ant Financial using this with Sesame Credit, which is one of their credit scoring applications at Ant Financial. And you're also seeing it with smart cities, things like City Brain, which is basically helping to manage a lot of data across 23 cities across Asia. So you're already seeing interesting things come from large companies getting involved, working with, whether that's government, working with, monitoring credit, things like that. But I'm going to go into, some more specific industries and where we're already starting to see a big impact. So blockchain gaming. Now, this is one that, is we're quite excited about because, we've been one of the first investors in the world in this sector, right? So dating back all the way to 2019, there's a pretty funny story, but, we came across this company called Splinterlands, and, nobody in the world at this point had a thesis on blockchain and gaming. And we met the founder of Splinterlands. We decided to test this out and try to understand what blockchain gaming was. And we loved it. And we got really addicted to it. We started, skipping meetings, started playing this game. We're like, oh, we're so busy. And then we're, playing and trying out these features. We're like, we have to invest in this. We have to be involved. We love this. We think there's huge value for being able to own assets in games. We think that it captures a lot of the value of time that people are investing into these things. And so we actually got involved with Splinterlands, which is now one of the biggest blockchain games in the world. So we were very fortunate on that. There's plenty of other examples around this, but I'm going to give you some data around blockchain gaming. It's a $4.6 billion market last year. But in the next few years, by 2027, we're expecting this to be over $65 billion. So we're talking about a 70% annualized compounded growth rate. And, you probably recognize some of the brands here like Axie Infinity. We talked about Splinterlands. Animoca is very well known as sort of almost like a conglomerate with very many different games in the industry. So Rare, great company. We wrote, I was actually part of writing the first academic case study on So Rare for INSEAD with a couple of really great co-authors, Gods Unchained and Top Shot. So NBA Top Shot, you may have heard of when, they did over $500 million in revenue, in the sort of height of the bull market, and everyone was sort of talking about NBA Top Shot at the time, right? So, a couple of, I think, really interesting things is that millennial gamers are 11 times more likely to buy cryptocurrency than non-gamers. And I think a big part of this is, even being able to access features more effectively. They're sort of more tech savvy. They're seeing the value of some of the things that are happening in the Web3 space. And that's part of the shift that we think is going to happen over time, where we think that the Web3 gaming sector is equally as big, if not bigger, than the shift that we saw from, essentially, pay to play at the start. If you go back into the gaming shifts, go back sort of 30, 40 years ago, where you would pay sort of these large ticket prices for games. We ended up having a big tectonic shift to free to play. And we think, play to earn as a concept can really make a major tectonic shift again in the industry. Having said that, we do see big issues, and I'll actually go through those to give you an idea of some of the things that, from our side as a venture capital firm that we're thinking about. And it's really about understanding all of these different points along the way, and how can we solve some of these barriers that are coming up because of for example, play to earn gaming. So I'll give you an example that some of you might be aware of, with Axie Infinity, with Splinterlands, with many other games, in the industry. What you saw in the bull market, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was already starting. What you really saw was, as these games started to gain in popularity, the asset prices started to skyrocket. And I know many of you would have heard the stories about, how expensive an Axie, became, how difficult it was for people to start joining these games because these in-game assets that you needed to play the game became so expensive. And this is actually a very big problem, because what ends up happening in Web3 right now in gaming is, once a game gets popular, everyone you get a lot of, almost like investors or people with capital that go and buy a lot of these assets, and it shoots up the price of these assets. And so now what happens then is, if you want to play one of these games, you can no longer afford to play one of these games because you can't buy the assets that are required. And you might need, $20,000 or $50,000, or even in some cases, you need to be a millionaire to play these games. And it's quite flawed from a conceptual standpoint. And so we see this as a very big barrier to Web3 gaming becoming, a globally recognized trend, right? And to become sort of the new thing in gaming. And so what we sort of identified is we need to find solutions that essentially allow anyone to be able to play these games regardless of, what their financial situation is. And one of the ways that we're looking at that is we just invest in a company called Nifty Arcade that's essentially doing smart contract based rev shares. So basically, anyone can join any game. They can borrow assets essentially from another player on a rev share. It's all smart contract based. It's all one click of a button essentially. But what this does is it allows anyone to play these games and to put basically no financial capital up front to play a game, which makes a lot of sense. And if you think about, Roblox or, other major games out there, even with a lot of these games, when people are going to start playing them, Fortnite, etc., like you're typically not putting in, money up front. Like you might want to try it, see if you like it, then you start playing more. Then you might decide to start putting some money behind it because it's going to increase your enjoyment or your experience. And so, we're looking at it in somewhat of a similar way to that, and to sort of decrease this barrier that's being created in these bull markets when asset prices go up. So I think it's a really cool innovation. It's something to look out for, and we think that's going to have a very big impact on solving these challenges in the Web3 gaming space. I want to talk about AI and gaming as well, because I think this is a fascinating space that not enough people are looking at, not enough people are talking about. And it's a market that we've been actually looking at for about 4 years now. And some of you may have seen the press release that came out yesterday, about Futureverse. So we're the first investor in a company called Altered State Machine, which is building out essentially AI-based gaming in Web3. And you can think about it in a number of really interesting ways, right? So think about like NPC characters in games. So if you're not familiar with NPC, these are sort of like, if you're in a game and there's like a shopkeeper, that's just like a general, computer, character, or you're going into some sort of character that's just a generic sort of computer player. What about in the future where we create sort of a level playing field where all of this is driven by AI? You can actually own and train these as a player in the game, and you might be able to create other experiences now because players can have a lot more flexibility in these games to own and sort of change the experience in these games. So we think there's a lot of value and interest around these NPC characters. There's a lot of other things you can start doing. If we're talking about, content generation, there's everything from music to objects to characters to animation. All of these things are going to impact the metaverse. It's going to impact a lot more than just the metaverse. And so one of our companies, so Altered State Machine, was just part of this acquisition and raise with Futureverse. We just raised $54 million on this. And we're building the first FIFA AI soccer league. So it's a or football league, right? So we're doing this in partnership with FIFA. If you are on Android, you can download the app. If you're on iOS, it just came out, I believe, a couple of days ago. So you can also download the app and try it out. But what's really cool here is it creates so many more unique possibilities, so much more interest, because it can be a lot more real. So if you take these AI characters, you can think of it almost like how a strand of DNA is unique. And every player, every character is actually essentially in a similar form, essentially a unique character based on a similar concept. And we think that this actually creates a lot more possibilities, a lot more interest. And there's going to be a lot more things that you can do, even in terms of training your characters' personalities and all sorts of stuff over time, that I think change the entire dynamic of how we think about gaming and how we might perceive the future of gaming. Now, with creator economy, and this is the last one where it still touches on gaming, this is a really fascinating one because it's very different from the other two examples. So Brushna is a no-code video game maker. And so anybody can go on and make a video game in, 5 minutes. And this is quite fascinating because it's all about hyper casual games. So, these are games like Flappy Bird, Super Mario, Space Invaders, Wordle. And so these are, fairly simple games. There's more and more game templates being built out every day, every week. But what a lot of people don't realize is 50% of all games played, all games downloaded are actually hyper casual. And so this is a massive market. And the way that we're looking at it is, we see anyone being able to create games that are, unique, interesting, almost into their micro communities, into their, into their schools, into their companies. And so this is a very different way than we maybe perceive gaming right now. But there's 17 billion installs per year. There's 2.5 billion in revenue in the hyper casual gaming segment. And for example, Brushna this year had a goal of creating 3,000 video games. And I just heard from the CEO, and there's over 150,000 games created this year alone already. So completely blew past our original target of 3,000 for the year. And it's, really catching on because what we're seeing is, teachers are making video games, and instead of it just being for their classrooms now, kids all around the world can play those games if they're engaging and fun. And we're seeing it as an interesting way potentially for teachers to monetize their content. Or we're seeing, people just create games for their friend groups, for their kids, for birthdays, like all sorts of interesting things. And while 95, 99% of these games may not, retain a lot of players, may not retain a lot of interest in the medium to long run, even if a small fraction maintains interest, when you're creating 150,000 games, or when you're creating 1 million or 10 million or potentially hundreds of millions of games a year, we see this as a completely different dynamic in the way that people currently think about games. So quite fascinating. If you haven't tried it, you want to create your own video game, even just for fun, it takes 5 minutes. Check it out on the Brushna website. Now, let's talk about supply chain. This is something that, impacts a lot of people. And obviously, there's a lot of different areas of supply chain. There's a lot of different areas as it was with gaming. And I'm focusing on some very specifics rather than being extremely broad to make sure that you're getting real examples of what's happening, where is their impact coming into these areas, right? So I'm trying to make it more interesting, more valuable for everyone. So with Check It, this is a company that works essentially on tamper-proof, supply chain and making sure that things, have essentially tamper-proof QR codes. They work with major companies like pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, on protecting and making sure that deliveries arrive and non-tampered. And so, their goal at Check It is to protect 100 million lives in the next 5 years, which is an incredible number. Even if you hit a fraction of that number, I think it's extremely impactful. And I'll give you some data around, pharma and consumer goods in Africa and the Middle East, as Check It's based out of Nigeria. 300 billion is lost, and 500,000 Africans die annually from counterfeit food and medicine. I'm going to stop there for a second because we're talking about 500,000 people dying a year because of this, right? So this is, the most important thing, is life. And, these are, while, we're always looking at, startups and ROI and profit, there's in a lot of ways, even non-comparable, much larger, dramatically larger ROI when you're impacting people's lives in these ways. And, we're talking about in the next 5 years, this resulting in 1.5 trillion in financial losses. We're talking about 2.5 million lives lost. So this is very impactful. And so Check is actually working in one of their larger projects with Merck. They're working on essentially ensuring that drugs can't be counterfeited and consumers can verify and ensure that they're getting non-tamper-proof drugs. And in the background, there's an entire blockchain layer to help ensure, traceability and communication of that information, effectively without being able to be manipulated. And so this is, some really, really cool stuff that we're seeing come out of, companies like Check It with many other, really incredible partners, major companies, some of them Fortune 500s. Now, pets and ownership. Now, this is an interesting one because, it's more of a fun one. We can talk about, everything from pets in the metaverse to pet data and health records, right? And the health of your pets, and everyone loves their pets. So 1 in 3 people globally own a pet. I'm sure many of the people on this call might own a pet. And this is oftentimes the type of market that gets overlooked in Web3 or in blockchain or with technologies. And a lot of people don't think about or realize what you can really do with this type of technology to transform some of these segments that might seem small, but we're talking about 1.3 trillion in total revenue by 2030 in this industry, right? So we're talking about like a massive, massive industry that oftentimes can get forgotten. And so, COVID-19 accelerated a lot of pet ownership. Maybe some of you got your first pets during COVID, or got a pet after a long break during COVID. But we have companies like Petastic that's actually putting health records for pets on blockchain. And why is this important, right? So we're not really interested in putting things on blockchain for the sake of putting them on blockchain. Like, that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't create value. So why is this valuable? So with Petastic in particular, what we sort of identified, what we learned was there's a huge opportunity around pet health records. And so any pet owner will know this, depending on the country that you're in. When you need to go to the vet, you need to, show them your vet certificates, right? And your vaccination records. And oftentimes these are all on paper. If you lose these, it could be a big problem. If you don't have these, you can get denied treatment. It is quite a big problem. And so we saw a very large opportunity with Petastic to basically get involved in digitizing all of this, creating tamper-proof records in an industry that's a lot simpler than human health records, which has a lot more restrictions for good reason as well. And so Petastic in the last few months has already put 85,000 pets on chain and started creating these pet IDs. Their goal by the end of the year is to have over 1 million pets on chain as part of this sort of, go-to-market proof of concept, which is pretty exciting. We see this as a huge, huge impact. We think there's a really interesting market here, and we think that every pet in the world, will probably want some sort of solution like this to streamline all this fragmentation around pet records and health records. Even we've heard stories about people trying to take their pet to get, grooming and being denied if they didn't have their vaccination records, things like this. So there's a lot of problems around this. Now, Dogami is a very different example of something in the pet industry, where Dogami is essentially working on, basically building the petaverse. And this is basically bringing all pets and pet owners into a metaverse where they can train, digital pets. You might have a replication of your existing pet in the digital world, and creating an entire sort of fun experience around this, right? So, extremely different use cases, but I think really interesting for everyone to be aware of some of the different things that are happening. Now, on the remittance side, there's a lot of really great companies working on remittances. Ripple, Stellar, you might be aware of. ARF is working on, solving some of these big challenges around remittances, bringing the cost of remittances down. from a B2B perspective. And here's some quick sort of data around this, right? On average, remittance costs as a percentage 6% when you start factoring in what's going on in the emerging markets. This is from the World Bank, and this is a very big problem because we're talking about really high fees. So if you're trying to send $200 home, $400 home, you're a migrant worker, you're working in another country, trying to make ends meet for your family, and 6%, 10%, even 20%, as high as that, of what you're sending is getting taken away in fees when you factor in some of the fraud and other things that happen. Like, this is staggering, right? And so one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is to bring this down to at most 3%. And you're starting to see more and more blockchain cross-border payments starting, or at least be in the background. And so, we're talking about instant settlement, which is usually a problem. I'm sure many times, people on this call have even had money transfer and they had to wait before it cleared through their bank account, things like this. You don't have to worry about those things when you're talking about a blockchain settlement layer, because it is instant and the asset has moved. We're also talking about a 40 to 80% reduction in transaction processing costs. And we're also talking about fully traceable. So when you think about it from a KYC or AML perspective, like an anti-money laundering perspective, this is much more robust, much more secure in a lot of ways, because you actually know every single place that money has been. Whereas in our current processes, when you deal with your current financial institutions, they know one step forward, one step back, right? So they know where the money came from and where it's going, but they can't trace it before that. And so this is where there ends up being, very big operations for people to say, like, launder money, et cetera. And that would be a lot more traceable on a blockchain layer. So, there's pros and cons here, obviously. But I think a lot of really exciting things in this space, especially to help the world move towards, a place where remittances are at most 3%, and people that need to keep those dollars in their pocket for their kids' education or for health and things like that are able to do that. So this is a really cool one as well. It's having a very big impact. Now, in the education space, I think this is a really cool space as well, because again, we don't think about and don't hear a lot of examples typically about how is this stuff really having an impact. So if you take some of the biggest and best institutions, most reputable institutions in the world, say MIT, INSEAD, there's a number of other institutions leading the way here. They're working on creating transparent records to essentially ensure reputations are upheld, to make sure that people can't have fake degrees and transcripts. And you might not think this is a big issue, but some of you might be aware of these very big situations, these very big controversies that have happened over time, where major figures have resigned over fake degrees and transcripts. If you're a little bit more experienced, a little bit older, you might remember a company called Yahoo. And you might remember the CEO of Yahoo was Scott Thompson, and he had a fake degree, and actually resigned after that became discovered as CEO. So this is not just something that affects small companies or people that don't look into it. It can affect a lot of people at a lot of great companies, and it can impact then a lot of shareholder value that gets eroded, and a lot of people's pension plans and things like that. And so really top institutions are leading the way here to basically create degrees and transcripts on blockchain where anyone can go on and just verify. An employer can verify that this is an original, and this is directly from the source then. And you can do this in real time without the old way of having to call the institution and then probably send a letter and then get something mailed back to you. And, all of these things that took very long was also very difficult if you're talking about cross-border. Now it's all digital, it's instant, and it's flawless, right? And so this is actually really, really cool when you start seeing how this works. And so you see a couple of examples here of like an attestation certification, a transcript, and an MBA diploma. And then you see they've got this download blockchain receipt, and you can just verify straight on it that this is the original. And you know, it helps you ensure that the grades are correct, but it helps you ensure that, you know, the individual is who they say they are the person that actually has gotten this degree, and it is official. So this is you know, really, really important. We do think that, you know, this is going to basically become a necessity in the education space. You know, every institution in the long run will likely have to have solutions like this to protect from just bad actors. And finally, on the charity and social impact side, and this is just one that I think is still nascent, but you know, it's one that I like talking about. It's got a lot of potential to create transparency in charitable giving. You know, and we're starting to already see some take up on certain aspects of this. So, you know, 78% of US charities already accept crypto. And that average crypto donation is 31 times larger than your average charitable give. Having said that, what we want to see over the longer run or the medium run is we want to see you know, charitable institutions, charitable foundations actually putting more transparent records of where the money went, but having this on a blockchain, right? So having this on a non-tamperable, you know, blockchain, being able to see like exactly how much money is getting there, what it's getting used for, having these records, you know, put up. And some people might say, okay, well, what if that charity puts up fake records? Well, the good thing about a blockchain is even if someone puts in incorrect data or deliberately misleading data, you know, you can then audit it. You can then trace it. You know exactly who put it in. You know who was part of the approvals. You can actually get to the bottom of it in a very transparent way. And so it actually helps create a lot more accountability. And it will help to force better and better and better quality of data over time. So, you know, you can also see that, you know, similar to say donating stock, donating crypto as well, will end up with, you know, more money to the charity just because, you know, you might be doing that pre-tax. So that's also something that may also help charities. But I think this is still an early space where we're still looking to see a lot more of an impact around the transparency side rather than just the giving side.